welcome back to the Mayor's Update.
Well, what a fantastic week this is. Normally we spend a great period of time with an open forum about all the things happening in St. Thomas, and we're going to talk a little bit about St. Thomas's past and a great friend of ours who spent his whole wasted youth here in St. Thomas. Bill Vigars,
you nailed it.
Yeah, you have written a book about Terry Fox and your time with Terry on his Marathon of Hope, and let's just start with that. How did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, the Marathon of Hope was 43 years ago, and ever since it ended, I was forever talking about Terry, telling stories about Terry Fox and about the run and what he was like and all kinds of details. And I'd talk to people and they go, "You got to write a book. You got to write a book." And about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a display at the Museum of History in Gatineau for a year, and it was called "Running into the Heart of Canada," and it was about Terry. And the curator of it interviewed me 2 or 3 times and everybody else that was still around back then. And at the end of it, he came back to me and said, "Bill, you're the only guy who remembers it. You have to write a book." And I'm a storyteller. I'm not a writer. So I tried it a couple of times and left it. And I know other people try and write books, and it's not an easy thing to do. And what happened was not this past January, the January before, this gentleman by the name of Sheldon Posen, he'd retired, and he started sending me messages going, "You have to write the book." And then my friend, who was a reporter for one of the Toronto newspapers, every time I'd post something about Terry, he said, "How's the book coming?" And without them knowing each other, in about the spring of last year, they both started to write me, started out once a month, then started about twice a month, and then started out weekly going, "Write the book, write the book." And eventually my wife, God bless her, sat me down and said, "You are the only guy who knows the story of Terry. And it's history, and you have to share his legacy. You promised to keep him alive, and you have to write the book." And it wasn't a royal command, but as closest as you could. And I thought, well,
You're not getting dinner tonight if you haven't started.
So I started. And by the way, I have to say, I don't know if he's watching, but Barry Bottineau, who I went to school with, in the midst of it comes out that I'm writing a book, and he writes, "How do you write a book in grade 10? You didn't know how to read or write. Sister Esther would never let you do that."
Yes.
So 4 chapters in, I went back and said, "This isn't working. It's no good. I'm going back and editing, and just it's not coming out." And the Ian Harvey, who I was working with, gave me the best advice I had in doing this. He said, "Stop trying to edit. Just keep writing." And
let it fall out. Yes.
Yeah. And the farther I got into it, the better it came. And the more it just flowed, exactly what you say, Joe. It just started to flow out. During the run, people said, "Are you taking pictures? Are you making notes? Are you keeping a diary?" And I go, "No, I'm making a movie up here." And for 43 years, that movie has run continually. And when I wrote the book, most chapters would take a week to 2 weeks. One took a month, trying to figure out certain things that happened, because it was very important to me that it had to be accurate and true to the story. And at one point, I went up to it's called the Sunshine Coast here out on the West Coast.
Yes.
And I checked into a cheesy motel, and honestly, it was like out of the movies. I got up at Timmy's 6 o'clock in the morning, got my coffee, got my donut, started writing. I'd have, something to eat, chips and a bottle of wine, that type of thing. And in 3 days, I wrote 3 chapters. Wow. Because it was a section between Sudbury and halfway up to the Sault Ste. Marie. And so many dramatic things happened in that stretch that it just came because it was my memory. I always make a joke. I don't know where my car keys are, but I can tell you exactly where we stopped on Dundas Street in London.
Right. On March 18th, on whatever day. Right. Yes.
Yeah. And the same with St. Thomas. One of the reasons I love St. Thomas, and my heart's never left there. And my memory is so clear and so brilliant of my growing up in St. Thomas. and the people there, and going to school there, and getting kicked out of that school, and then getting kicked out of that school, and then getting kicked out of that school. I ended up at Arthur Voden, where I think they basically just retired my number. But
there's no place to go after that. No,
after that, yes. But I was almost 21 when I got out of grade 12, believe it or not. And by 22, late 22, I was a member of city council, which I was very proud of, quite frankly, and very
we're
proud
sitting
of.
in the council chambers tonight, Bill. This is we like the council chambers for taping the show because it has the best internet anywhere in City Hall. So so we come in here and sit with the former mayors on the wall behind us, and
the old fellows,
the other guys. But Bill, tell a bit of the story starting with Terry, and then I know you, as you said, the near the end, the Sudbury through Thunder Bay period of time is probably hard to remember. But tell us a little bit about some of the trip.
Well, I left St. Thomas in 1975. I was manager of the Chamber of Commerce, and the Welland Chamber of Commerce offered me twice of what I was making. And so I went and talked to a bunch of older gentlemen whose opinion I completely respected. There was Vince Sheridan, Jack Ferryman, Jim Carey, Bob Anderson, Bob McCaig. And basically all of them said the same thing. Go, take the job. You can always come back. So I was there for 5 years, and then I applied for a job with the Canadian Cancer Society as the director of public relations and fundraising, and I got the job. And about 2 months after I got hired, my boss, a gentleman by the name of Harry Rowlands, came to my door and said, "There's a kid running across Canada. Do you want to go see what you can do for him?" And because of my upbringing in St. Thomas, because my involvement with the community, being a city alderman, working at the radio station, being involved in the community organizations, I knew how small towns worked, which came in handy with me trying to raise Terry's visibility. So after I get that letter, I talk to Terry. He's out in the Maritimes. Nothing's happening. He's hit and miss where he's raising money. And I talk to him on the phone. He's in Sheet Harbor, Nova Scotia. And I'm trying to raise his spirits because I know he's bummed out. And I say, "When you get to Ontario, what do you want to do?" And he goes, "Well, I want to meet Bobby Orr, Daryl Sittler, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. I want to go to the CN Tower, and I want to go to a Blue Jays game." And I thought to myself, well, the worst thing anybody can say to you is no. So my Deborah Kirk, who worked with me, both of us got on the phone. And when he called the next day at 5 o'clock, I was able to, by the way, from a phone booth. There was no such thing as cell phone.
Cell phone there. And
no internet. And he called collect. Yeah. So when he called back, I said, "Okay, listen, Sittler's on, CN Tower's on, the Blue Jays are on. Bobby Orr is going to be someplace in Ontario, overseas, but he's going to come and find us." And Trudeau at the time was overseas, and I didn't get hold of him, but we eventually did meet him. So I was trying to give him hope that when you get to Ontario, things will take off. Right. I went back and spent the next 3 weeks driving between Toronto and Ottawa and all those little towns, Caladar, Marmora. Well, Peterborough was the biggest one. And all I had was a couple of Polaroids of Terry. And I'd say, "This guy's running across Canada with one leg. If he comes here, will you do something?" And they all said basically the same thing. By the way, I'd go into town and say, "Who runs the city, or who runs the events in town?" It was either one of the service clubs, or it may have been the Ladies' Aid. And everybody said the same. "Well, if he makes it this far, we'll do something." And I said, "I can promise you he'll make it." Because from the moment I met him that first morning in New Brunswick and spent that first day with him, I realized, one, he was for real. When he spoke, it was from the heart. Nobody wrote his speeches. He was no ego, completely selfless. And he was just completely focused on raising money to try and find a cure for cancer, based on his experience of being in the children's cancer wards when he went through treatment out in Vancouver. And that was my introduction to him. And By the way, I have to tell you, it almost didn't happen. You're going to find in the book that the setup of the Cancer Society at that time was you had a national office, you had a provincial office, then you had a district office, and then you had the local communities. Well, one couldn't tell the other one what to do. They could, so the national office said, we're going to have Terry Fox. Some of the provinces said, we're not. And one of them on it was Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And that was based on, it was St. Thomas was, I'm trying to think, 7 or 8 districts. 2 of them, which were the biggest ones, Hamilton and Toronto, said, no, we're not going to participate because we don't have the volunteers. And I'm trying to tell them, you don't need volunteers. It just happens. And there was this big meeting called, and the volunteers all came across from Ontario, and a big meeting. And at the last minute, they voted, and Hamilton switched their vote. And off I went and joined Terry just outside of Drummondville, and I was with him until Thunder Bay. So that was the beginning.
Very good.
And it grew. It was like a tidal wave. It, as you say, started very slow, and then the country caught on to this young man who is trying to raise money for cancer. And it just, am I right? It just, as you got to the next town, there was more people there than there was the last one, and as you got to the next one,
it got bigger and bigger. I'm going to start with the first day I joined him in Quebec. I don't speak French. So I called a friend of mine from Welland, my Welland days. He was bilingual. And I said, can you come to Quebec with me for 4 or 5 days to go with Terry Fox? And he said, sure. When? And I said, 4 hours from now. And I was calling him from the hotel where that meeting was. So anyway, we end up in just outside of Drummondville. The provincial police in Quebec are trying, they've already moved him off a main road. He's on a secondary road. And now they're moving him off that, basically onto back roads, almost gravel roads. And so 15 minutes after we arrive, and Ray had no idea what he'd signed up for. So I'm in shirts and shorts and running shoes, and Ray's wearing a blazer and a white shirt. I don't remember if he's wearing a tie, but he may have been. But he's dressed up. So 15 minutes after we get there, the police arrive, and I go over and talk to them, and they want him off. There's nothing I can say to change their mind. I go back over to Ray and say, Ray, I don't care what you say to these guys, but you got to keep us on the road. So he goes over and starts talking to them, and I can see they're getting friendlier. And at one point, maybe 10, 15 minutes in it, they shake hands, the police get in their car, and they drive away. And Ray goes like this from the other side of the road, and I go, okay, guys, let's go. I go. I never asked him what he said until about 20 years later. And we're in a bar. And I said, remember that time out on the highway and the cops, and you talked to them? What did you say to them? And he said, well, when I went over there, I was speaking in English, and they were off the road, and I switched to French. And he said it was hard for me to remember my French, but it all came back. And they became a little bit looser. And then he said, I don't know where it came from, but out of nowhere, I looked at the cops and said, I've been sent by Prime Minister Trudeau from Ottawa to make sure that Terry Fox arrives in Ottawa for July the 1st celebrations, and we need your cooperation. And they fell for it.
And you stay with a bigger, you can do it.
And the title in that chapter in the book is called "You Do What You Got to Do."
That's it. Yeah.
So we've got a question for one of our viewers here in St. Thomas, Margaret McKnight, and she's saying, there's so many books already. Why are you writing a book? Why have you written a book?
This book is completely different than anything that's ever been written. The book's about my relationship with Terry, and the behind the scenes, the politics that went on, the pressure that he had to deal with that I didn't let him know. Some of the stuff, most of the stuff, bureaucracy tried to kill, I don't know, the radio star, whatever it is. Bureaucracy was trying to get in the way. They were making him run far off of his route, or trying to, and I just ignored them. So there's stories in the book. You're going to find out that he had a wonderful sense of humor. You're going to find out that he was concerned that people had put him up on a pedestal, and he was very, very uncomfortable with the phrase, he's a hero. He would say, I'm no different than anybody else in this room. And if I ever get an ego, or if that ever change, my run means nothing. So that is the sort of the way I wrote the book, trying to show the reader. I try and take them right inside the van too. Um, there was one book written shortly after the run. Some of the stories are in there, but they're 3 or 4 sentences where I may take 3 or 4 pages to tell the same story. And you're going to finish the book knowing who Terry Fox was as a human being. And I'm very, very honored. The reviews have been out of this world. And the individuals who read it say, on one page, I'm laughing, and the next page, I'm crying. And it was very emotional for me to write it too, because I had to go back and go through all the hard times. I had to go through the ending of the run. I stayed friends with Terry as he fought his battle right to the very end, and I had to write about that. So I hope people walk away with it knowing Terry better. You can't possibly like him any better because Canadians love him, but they'll find out what a wonderful human being was, and what just a regular guy he was with a great sense of humor.
Bill, we want to help you too. I mean, you've got books for sale, and as you say, it's already been quite well celebrated how good the book is.
Well, I think interviews on CBC, CTV, The National,
Yeah.
and way more.
Yeah, would you think you're a politician?
Globe and Mail.
The Saturday Globe and Mail this past weekend had a 2-page spread.
Yeah,
which I picked that paper up and I went, holy cow. And well, it was a piece that I wrote, but I didn't realize what they were going to do with it.
There's probably a number of ways you can tell people to find your book then.
Well, the best way for people in St. Thomas right now is I'm going to be there next Friday, a week tomorrow, at Lockwood Books on Talbot Street. I believe they're 488. They're 3 doors down from Holy Angels Church.
Yes.
Where I spent
that way. Where the school used to be, but you.
Yes. Well, I was telling Vanessa when I was there in St. Thomas last week, I was going, that was the schoolyard. That was a factory that burnt down that they handed Chinese checkers over the fence to all the kids in the thing. That was where Monsignor Morrison yelled at me because I was doing whatever I was doing.
Yeah, right. And Lockwood Books has been a great find for our downtown, a real bookstore of the old type of bookstore.
Oh, I love that bookstore. It's something out of a Stephen King movie. I loved it when I went in there.
It's perfect. Dusty books on shelves. They're just fantastic.
Yeah. And I went when the publisher came out and wanted me to do signings. I requested to do them on small independent bookstores rather than the big box stores. I don't know if you realize, but I was one of the guys who started the Downtown Development Board.
Yes.
With guys like Clifford Maxwell and Bernie Riv and Bob Anderson. And
I didn't get to take over for years later, being much younger.
So to deal with Vanessa, who and Tara McCauley, who I think is a new council member, and I know her dad Leo very well. As a matter of fact, Leo's been making fun of me through this whole thing.
No doubt.
Well, and he makes fun of me, so it's okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's to me, this whole thing has gone full circle for me. You know, when I came back, Mom and Dad, I grew up at 36 Flora Street, and I have wonderful memories of St. Thomas and playing in the back alleys. And when I used to come back, and visit. They lived in 96 and 97, and I would come back and spend 3 or 4 days. I spent more time than with my brothers and sisters who lived in town, because I'd come back 5 or 6 times. And my favorite thing to do was go up to the Midtown,
yes,
and then go over and see Tony and Val at Capri, order pizza, and then I'd walk the back alleys eating my pizza.
Yeah,
because I played in all those back alleys, between John Street and Flora Street, and the old horse field, which is now the cafeteria for Arthur Voden. Yeah. I'm old. So many memories of St. Thomas. I love the city. I've never left there.
Have you been up to the elevated park?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's unbelievable. You know what? I am so I live out on the West Coast, and I pick up a paper or I go online, and I can't believe the amount of um, press the community is getting from the tourist sector,
Yes.
where you're getting bus tours now, and they're going to Port Stanley, and they're going to the
All our murals and
Yeah.
right. It just
yeah.
yeah.
So I think who the people behind the Chamber of Commerce right now, because I follow you. I read the Times Journal every day. Um,
Yep.
I
Well,
follow the Chamber of Commerce, the monthly events, and I always read them. Um, I'll never forget when I was manager of the Chamber of Commerce, we had a guest speaker from the Ministry of Labor, I think it was, and there was some new act, and I asked the guy to explain it. Well, you've got 100 people standing around drinking and relaxing after work. And he proceeded to read the act out of, like, literally reading the act.
This was your guest speaker. Oh boy. Yeah.
to the point, like 10 minutes and 15 minutes into it, I had to go, "Thank you very much, sir."
Yeah.
So they're much more sophisticated
Get
these
your own
days.
copy of this. No, no, but no, it still works the same way. I walked into the Canada Southern Railway Station this morning and ran into Paul Jenkins, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, which has just now moved there. And in about 15 seconds, we talked about a landowner locally who wanted to build a new apartment building on his property. And I went off to my other meeting and he went off to his, but we still do business that same way in St. Thomas. It's run into each other, talk about what's good, set up a meeting for the next day or two on how we can get this done. And it's still that way. Grayden's sitting on the Chamber of Commerce now. I of course spent a long time on that board and chair of it a couple of times, and we never did quite get Hammersley right. I'm hoping he's watching tonight.
Is he still there? No, I know he's not there. Bob, is it time to quit?
We had more fun with that group, but you're talking about the morphing of that time, the business after five or whatever it was, the after work crowd things. I remember my first few. You didn't dare go not in a suit and tie. I mean,
yeah.
It's come basically now. A Speedo is appropriate attire. You can do it now.
I was actually going to put my bathing suit on for this interview because we're heading to my brother-in-law's to sit in the hot tub, and Sherry goes, "You're not going to wear that in there." But I said, "They can't see me.
Don't stand up. We're okay."
Now, Bill, you've got a special shirt on, I think.
Yeah. This is
stand up a bit and show us your shirt. We won't look at your shorts. Yeah, excellent.
That's when you get the book. And by the way, if you've ordered one online and you're listening, they are started to be delivered yesterday because people have been going, when do they come? When do they come? The book actually went on sale officially yesterday, although Lockwood was able to put it on sale. The publisher gave them okay to do that 2 weeks early. But now all those people that have ordered books, if you're wondering, I'm getting messages that they started arriving today.
Right.
So it's a great book, and it's. Do we have time for me to tell one funny story?
Go ahead.
Please do.
Okay. I just want to show the sense of humor that Terry had. He wanted nothing. He did not want to benefit in any way, shape, or form for the run. And I was the guy that had to come to him, and people had offered to pay for his university when he finished. And he went, "No, I don't want to benefit in any way, shape, or form." So this one particular day, I come to him and I say, Standard Brands, who was Bobby Orr's corporate sponsor, and one of their products is Planters Peanuts. And if you know, the logo or the mascot of Planters Peanuts is Mr. Peanut, with the top hat and the monocle and the cane and the tuxedo vest. And I said, they want to give you a car if you'll let Mr. Peanut run with you that last mile, English Bay in the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
And Terry goes, that's a really good idea, as long as I can wear the Mr. Peanut outfit. Which was his, and one quick story. We think he's broken his ankle up up near the Sioux. We fly him back to the Sioux. We get it X-rayed. It turns out it's just really bad shin splints, and as he's leaving the hospital, there's a media scrum going on, and they're yelling questions. And somebody yells the question, Terry, which one of your ankles is bothering you? And of course, Terry looks at him like, and he goes, the one I don't have.
Yeah, the good one. Yeah. Oh, we still get questions like that from the press. Think it through.
So yeah, Terry was a lovely, lovely man.
There was a really touching story that I've heard you tell before, and it was about when you were up in the final moments of his trip, and now he wasn't able to make it, but he needed to get a plane home. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. First off, we were more worried about him having an enlarged heart that was caused by the drugs he had taken for cancer treatment. It was not a birth defect. And so Doug, Daryl, and I never, ever suspected that cancer was going to return. So when it did return, it was an unbelievable shock. And immediately, I was actually in St. Thomas when I got the news. I was at Mom and Dad's 40th wedding anniversary at the Knights of Columbus Hall. And I got on a plane and I arrived in Thunder Bay, same time as Mom and Dad arrived from the West. And we drove down to the hospital together, and they went into the room. And then Doug and Daryl and I went in, and Terry looked at us and said, the cancer's back. And I was, I held it together, but not much. And then all my emotions shut down because they said, you have to get him home today on a plane, laying flat, because one of his lungs was filling with fluid. So we could not put him into a commercial flight. So myself and one of the district directors for the Cancer Society, we're downstairs at the Cancer Society office across the street, and we're on the phone trying to get a plane. And we're trying corporate people, and nothing happens. And finally, he gets OHIP on the phone, and he tells them we need a plane to fly Terry Fox home. And somebody says, well, we can't do that. I want to talk to somebody higher. So it goes up the chain to whoever is the top. And the guy whose name was Lou Fine, that he was had been a shoe salesman, and he called a spade a spade. He was rough, had a rough side to him, very, very good man. But anyway, he gets somebody and they say, well, we can't possibly do that. And Lou goes, I've got all of the national media outside my door right now. Do you want me to go outside and tell them that the Ontario government will not fly Terry Fox home? One moment, sir. And about 45 seconds later, they came on the phone and said, there'll be a plane there in an hour and a half.
Right.
So
sometimes you got to twist the right arm in
yes,
the right way.
In the right way. So anyway, we get Terry. It's time to leave. Before the media shows up, he leaves the hospital. We get him across the road to the offices of the Cancer Society. He goes down the basement and he's on a gurney. And when it's time to leave, the ambulance is out in front and the media is waiting for him. They roll him over to the bottom of the stairs. They're going to carry him up, and he refuses to get carried up. He gets off the gurney and he said, no, I'm going to walk up the stairs. And here he was 2 days before running a marathon, and now he can hardly climb 10 stairs. And he gets on the gurney and they roll him out, and he does that press conference that everybody remembers. And if you weren't alive then, you've probably seen it many, many times. And I'm not even going to go there, but we get him in to the ambulance, and there's Mom and Dad sitting at his head, and I'm at the foot. Christy Blatchford, who was passed now, but she was a reporter for the Toronto Star and a doctor. And we're driving to the airport, and there's dead silence in the ambulance. And then Dad slowly starts going, this is so unfair. This is so unfair. And Terry said, what do you mean, Dad? And he said, the cancer coming back. And he said, no, Dad, I'm no different than anybody else. This is what cancer is all about. And then he paused and he said, maybe now people will understand why I did it. And as I said earlier, he was concerned that people had put him up on this pedestal, and he was wise enough to know that people were now going to have to watch him go through chemo and radiation and firsthand and see what cancer was all about. And I think that speaks of Terry very deeply of who he was. We get to the airport. There's a picture in the book where I'm holding mom and dad, and Lou, the gentleman I was talking about there, he's leaning against the plane's wing, and it looks like he's been hit by a Mack truck. The look on his face, and we get him in the plane, and I roll over and I give him a hug and tell him I love him, and say I'll come out and see you. And they close the door, and I've been able to hold it together until the plane starts to taxi down the runway, and as it takes off, I'm thinking to myself, this isn't the way the movie was supposed to end. And then I don't have time to really deal with my feelings when somebody comes out and says you want it on the phone, and it was Barbara from As It Happens. And I did this interview, and she was so gracious in letting me get through it, because I broke down several times through it. What I found out a long time after is she too was going through her own battle with cancer at the time. And then also what saved me is I get back to Toronto, and the telethon was that week, and I get a call from CTV, would you come over to our offices? And I sit in this boardroom where they banks of phones and all these people, and they're going, what kind of music does he like? And what was his favorite color? That kind of stuff. And I went, well, he liked John Denver. Next thing I know, they've got John Denver on the phone, and he's saying yes to come to Toronto for the telethon. So at the end of it, they say to the producer, says, where are you going to be Sunday? And I said, home, I guess. And he said, do you want to go be with Terry? And they flew me out to Vancouver, and Doug and Daryl and I and Terry in his hospital room watched the first half of the telethon. And then again, none of my family, I never had to deal with cancer as a volunteer. My family all lived to old ages, and I always say I was Irish and they died of cirrhosis of the liver. But not to make a joke in this sad story, but it was true.
Yep.
And so the two boys, they get called downstairs to go on television, and I'm sitting on the side of the bed with Terry, and they roll in the drip bag for him and hook him up. And that was his chemo starting, and he fell asleep on my shoulder. And that night, I stayed at his house, and I slept in his bedroom. That was piled high with boxes and boxes and boxes of souvenirs and gifts he would be given along the run. And I was able to stay there for a week, and then I went back out about a month later with my kids, because my kids were 8 and 9 at the time and traveled with us for most of the run, and visited him and had another 4 or 5 day visit. And then I stayed in touch with him right up. The last time I talked to him was about a week before he passed away.
Bill, such memories and such, it starts off from a very positive point of view. Of course, it's always sad at the end, but the positive piece that Terry brought to our country, and certainly to the purpose of raising money to stop cancer in its tracks. You're pretty brave in being able to tell those stories, and we thank you for that. And we'll remind those in St. Thomas. I know Grayden and I will both be at Lockwood Books when you're here. What a significant story, and thank you for sharing that with us today. This will be the first Mayor's Update. We didn't answer one question about what's going on in the city, because this is a pretty important piece, and thank you for coming to Mayor's Update tonight and sharing with us this story, your story, with Terry Fox. It brings goodness to our hearts as to how we got to here in Canada, and you got to play a really close role.
That summer he brought hope to Canadians, brought the country alive, and I think right now we need a little bit of that. Not just Canada, but the world needs a little bit of hope, a little bit of brightness, and a good positive story. And that's what the Marathon of Hope was about.
Well, thank you, Bill, for joining us tonight. And thank you all for watching. If you've watched the show tonight, please share with your friends so other people can come on and watch this as we stream it. It will be a fun thing to watch the number of viewers we have on this show. Thanks, Bill.
Margaret, and I would be remiss if I did not say good evening to Margaret McKnight.
Yes, thank you. All right. Thanks.
And like you, I have wonderful memories of Holy Angels, all of the churches, St. Thomas, all of the back alleys. And you guys are doing a great job. Chamber of Commerce, City Council. from afar, and I follow you.
Well,
Top notch, top notch.
we've got big footsteps to follow in, but it makes us better, makes us all better.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
it's great to see the history, the tie-ins. You
Yep.
know, you're being raised in St. Thomas, taking those values, tying that in with Terry, helping him come across Canada as far as he could go, and then sharing those stories and these stories that people haven't heard before with all of Canada and the world, because that's exactly where it's going to go.
Yeah, and actually, earlier today I did an interview in San Francisco, and another one in Houston. Terry is not really that well known in the States, but the book is on sale there, and there's runs all over the world. It's a good story. It's a happy story. It's a positive story.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. And
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. I've had a great. I wish the viewers had been there for the first half hour before we came on the air.
That's when we told all the funny stories. Yeah, I get it. Thanks.
Next time we have you back.
We'll see you next Friday.
We'll see you next week. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.